Hey, heathens, how y'all doing? Um,
Yes.
so I'm the Godless Engineer. I have my own channel where I discuss things like mythicism, general responses to religious arguments. We do a Bible reading, except unlike the Bible history skeptics over there, we're reading it from cover to cover, not from beginning to front, which must be a
Yeah, I
great
know.
Wow, that's impressive.
I know, but we're doing that. I also do like reviews of like flat Earth content and stuff like that. So there's a whole schedule on my channel every week that I go through things, and I just got memberships on my channel. So the Skeptic Mafia is a thing that you can join now, and so yeah, that's pretty much what I do, and I'm here to talk about how Jesus probably didn't exist.
Awesome. And before we officially begin, I want to go through how the format's going to run. We're going to go 10 minutes for the first like introduction rounds to their positions. You don't have to use the entire 10 minutes. If you don't, we'll just switch over to the next person. And then following that, we're going to do 2 5-minute rebuttal rounds. After that, we will go into like we usually have on here, an open back and forth discussion. Steve and I are going to be completely out until we close out, and then if he has any questions or if I have any questions, we'll ask that at the very end. We'll only jump in to get you guys back on course, or in the event that you talk over each other. But I think that both of you guys are going to be respectful enough to let the other one finish talking, and then we'll go from there. And before we begin, the whole Asian thing, John, it just reminded me of, you remember when that plane crashed and that those guys prank called in, and there was like holy shit, we too low. Bing dang out. Yeah, that reporter was reading off the names of the people who had died in the crash, or the pilots. Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah. No,
okay.
I remember that. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yep. All right. So do you have a preference on which of you two would like to go first?
I don't have a preference. Either way works for me.
Okay. I don't either. Do you want
to
sound better now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Does my sound better now? Okay.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, I don't have a preference.
Start with you, Chris. We'll start with you since you're making the assertion that he did. You're making the positive, so we'll start with you, and your 10 minutes starts right now.
Okay. Well, first things first is I want to thank a few people. I want to thank my friend Phil, who graciously sent this to me for free. Absolutely wonderful. I'd like to thank a few of my other friends who have been helping coach me throughout this. I'd like to thank NonSequitur for hosting, and most of all, I would like to thank John for honoring me with the debate. With that, everyone in the chat, I want to see if you're a mythicist, a historicist, undecided, and who here wants to see me get creamed. So, first things first is I'm here to argue that Jesus probably was a historical figure, at least in some sense. I'm not here to argue that he was a Messiah or that the theological version of Jesus was a real person in any way, shape, or form. I'm here to argue that there was a person behind the myth. So the first thing I'm going to do is, Godless Engineer and I agreed that we wanted to talk a lot about the Gospels and the Epistles as historical objects in this when we were talking on Twitter. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about the Synoptic Gospels. And so firstly is to dispel the rather outrageous notion that the Synoptic Gospels are all just blatant copies of Mark. They do copy Mark. Around 45% to 50% of Matthew and of Luke are copied out of Mark. However, there is around 30% in each of them that is completely unique to their books only. And you can look this up on basically on your own little Wikipedia page right now. I will not be arguing for the existence of Q like other scholars. I do think there was a Q, but I don't think it's really relevant or pertinent here in particular. So the next thing to do is then to establish if we're going to say that the Gospels are useful, can they be used as a historical text? And that is a little bit of a trickier question. I recently just watched Godless Engineer's video that he put up today on this topic, and I thought that was rather interesting. He notes that there's, we have all the mythology in the text, all the theology, and then they're definitely pushing a theological agenda. the unfortunate thing is that that's actually common with almost all of our historical texts. Plutarch, Herodotus, all of them actually have theological agendas and that they push throughout all the texts. They push for their beliefs in their gods, push for their divine origins of many people. For example, Augustus Caesar or Romulus and other characters like that. So trying to argue that there's myth in it so it can't be trusted really isn't actually that strong of an argument in my opinion, though I don't think John is going to be arguing that in particular tonight. So the next big question is then, if we're going to possibly say that they could be historical, what parts of them are? John, I know, has actually referenced John Dominic Crossan before, saying that it's all just parable. And other scholars who say that as well. Richard Carrier, I know, does not consider them evidence for or against the historicity of Jesus. In his book, he basically considers the Gospels able to be explained by both mythicism and historicism. The issue with this is that actually, for example, like referencing John Dominic Crossan, as he was actually part of the Jesus Seminar, they all agreed that actually around 12% of the sayings in the Gospels could be traced back to Jesus. John Dominic Crossan himself in his book actually argues that many of those parables and stories of Jesus' life actually could be traced back. So yeah, we have basically unanimous scholarly consensus that he did exist. I'm not going to be arguing from the consensus though. So what is it that in there that is going to then be historical is the question. What is it that we can gather that is historical? Obviously, we can't consider the parts that Matthew and Luke copy from Mark to be automatically reliable because they're just copying from Mark. So they're really you only have one source, right? Well, then what we have to do is actually look at the material that they have outside of Mark that would corroborate with Mark. Luke's depiction of the crucifixion, for example, doesn't appear to be copied directly from Mark. He makes a lot of his own ideological pushes through it. So he obviously didn't see the need to do that. We also have then another gospel that I haven't talked about yet, which is the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John does not actually make use of Matthew, Luke, or Mark, for at least what most scholars' opinions of it have been. If he had access to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he didn't see the need to directly copy them. We know this linguistically because he shares almost nothing similar with those Gospels, that from what I've researched anyways. So he would actually account as an independent source for a lot of those events. For example, the cleansing of the temple, the crucifixion. So that would give us another possible source. I know GE will probably bring up how late the Gospel of John is, though. Probably around 90 to 110 CE or so. So around the same time as Josephus was writing. So yes, that is an issue, is the lateness of the text. And that's one thing that he brings up in his video, is that we have to consider how late these texts are coming into being. One issue with, though, trying to argue a text is too far removed from the events to have any information is because that is unfortunately true of most of our historical figures and events, is that they're separated anywhere from 50 to 100 years, if not more. That's true in the case of Alexander the Great. The only possible contemporary source we have is the Babylonian Chronicle, and that could date as far ahead as 100 years after him. We don't have a fixed date for it that I know of. So if we're going to try and say that, then we could actually dismiss most historical events as not being reliable enough to actually ascertain that they happened. So I don't really buy into it. It is most certainly pertinent because the farther away you get from the event, the more likely it is that it's going to be corrupted by some mythology. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a hint of history in there. So that's why we then have to cross-reference it with older sources, which then takes us to our oldest sources about Jesus, which are going to be the epistles. The epistles, I know we are definitely going to disagree on. I know John is going to argue that Paul's conception of Jesus was a celestial Jesus, if I'm not mistaken. That I definitely don't agree with. I'm going to provide a few examples and why I think that they argue for historical Jesus briefly, and we'll get into that more. Because how much time do I have?
You have 2 minutes and 15 seconds left.
Okay, so let's just go straight to there. So I'm just going to skip some of the lesser ones. Romans 1:2 through 4, Galatians 4:4, Romans 15:8. You guys can look those up on your own, but the ones I'm going to bring up is 1 Corinthians 9:5. Do we not have the right to take along a believing wife, as do other apostles and the brothers of the Lord, and Cephas? Note that he's contrasting the brothers of the Lord against Cephas and against the apostles. They're not the same. So he is clearly differentiating the brothers of the Lord. So they're not the same. I don't think he's talking about a metaphorical brother in that sense, because if you're going to try and talk about a metaphorical brother, obviously Cephas, I think, would qualify. Then we have the famous passage in Galatians 1:18 through 19 that talks about the brother of the Lord, James, and that contrasts him also against the other apostles and Cephas. They are not brothers, only James is. Where else do we find that James is a brother of Jesus? We can look at the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verse 3, where it lists his brothers being James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. And I want to bring up here that it only brings them up as being brothers of the same mother. That's going to be relevant later on in our discussion when I talk about Josephus. And then another reference to their being brothers is the Gospel of John, chapter 7, verse 3. Then you can there's one more that I think that's going to be really good for my argument. 1 Thessalonians 2:14 through 16. Be imitators, brothers of the churches of God, that we are in Judea in Christ Jesus, because you yourselves suffer the same things by your own fellow citizens as do they by the Jews, who killed both the Lord Jesus and the prophets, and are persecuting us. I don't know how one can really get around that without arguing interpolation. So I will leave it there. That is my introduction.
All right. Awesome. Milwaukee Atheist, by the way, says, guys, I like both these guys, and I'm excited for this. Good luck to both of them. I'm hearing an echo. Who's got the stream going?
Not me.
Chris, can you?
Oh,
okay.
Here. Yep, it is.
Oh, you lying? Okay. That was engineer. The next 10 minutes is for you, and that's going to start right now.
First, I want to say we agreed beforehand.
Whoa.
Hang on,
John, you're clipping
you're gonna
bad.
have to reload.
We're getting every other word.
Sounds like Kyle's old internet.
Milwaukee Atheist.
Did Kyle hand him down his old internet, because Kyle has new internet now? Did he give you his old one?
I think if he resets, it should pop him right back in.
Yeah, he just needs to
probably just sputtering.
The call, yeah.
But yeah, thank you, Milwaukee Atheist, for the super chat. All right. Can't hear him at all. You get any audio levels, Dave? Okay.
People are saying he was probably speaking.
There we go. Now we've got him back. Now we've got him back.
Yeah. I can hear John.
Okay.
All right. We'll reset the clock, and whenever you're ready, go.
Okay. So thanks, everybody, for being here. Thanks, NonSequitur. Thanks, Bible History Skeptic, for having the conversation. So I guess we'll start with the New Testament Gospels. First, I have done a much longer conversation on the reliability of the Gospels, and I'm not going to go through that entire thing, but I'll summarize it a little bit. The New Testament Gospels are not reliable in any sense. That includes theologically, textually, and historically. Textually, we have no idea how much the Gospels have changed in the first 100 to 200 years of their existence, because we don't have any copies that date prior to the 3rd century. We do know that after that point, thousands of scribal errors, both intentional and accidental, can be tracked throughout time. Historically, they aren't reliable because the Gospels were written to teach theology, not to record history. And just like